Hello, I'm Gina Eubanks, Vice President of Professional Services with the Institute of Internal Auditors.
And I'm Richard Chambers, the President and CEO of the Institute of Internal Auditors.
The Audit Executive Center issues an annual report about the pulse of the profession. This year we had 367 Chief Audit Executive respondents. Also, we interviewed 24 Chief Audit Executives. Today we're going to focus on 3 key findings out of the report: 3 lines of defense, Chief Audit Executive career path and competencies, and risk-based audit planning and meeting shareholder expectations.
Well, it's good to be with you today, Gina, and I'm glad we're getting a chance to talk about these really important trends.
Yes, Richard, in the Pulse of the Profession, we found that 66% of our CAEs felt that the lines were very blurry between internal audit and the second line of defense. That's the enterprise risk management and compliance groups.
Yeah, you know, Gina, it's interesting because this 3 lines of defense model has only been around for about 3 years, and it originated in Europe, and it's gained a lot of traction as a great model to illustrate internal audit's role as the third line of defense. But I think what your results have indicated is that there's not as much clarity between the second and third lines of defense as perhaps the model might indicate.
Right. And in some of our interviews, we discovered that the integrity and objectivity of drawing the line between internal audit and compliance or risk management is based on the role that internal audit would play. They may lead some of those activities, but not conduct some of those activities.
Yeah, I think what the survey revealed is what we've been seeing for a while, and that is there are some things that internal audit does that are really second line of defense functions, such as taking responsibility for the risk management function. Sometimes they get more involved in compliance, particularly like in healthcare, where internal audit is also sometimes tagged as the compliance function. So I think you get some of that, and then I also think you get a few of the second line of defense functions who are starting to think that maybe they ought to have that direct reporting relationship to the board. And so I think that's what's creating some of the blurriness here.
Right, and if an internal audit group thinks that they are crossing the line and doing too much of management's roles and responsibilities, they feel like they can't do an independent assurance. I heard that some of them are actually outsourcing and looking to a third-party provider to provide that third-party assurance on their own selves.
Yeah, what we recommend is if internal audit does take on a role, such as the compliance function or the risk management function or corporate investigations, we've recommended that be addressed in the internal audit charter, and that there be a clear understanding with the audit committee that if the risk assessment would indicate that one of those areas warrants an internal audit engagement or internal audit coverage, that's when the internal audit function would reach out to a third party to make sure that third party can provide that assurance to the audit committee.
Well, let's talk a little bit about risk-based planning and meeting our stakeholders' expectations. We are seeing that when we look at the audit distribution, that only 6% of the audit plan is allocated to strategy risk. However, in our interviews, we've learned that the chief audit executives feel that it's being considered across the board in all their audit plan. 46% of executive management says they focus on strategic risk, and the audit committee says 28%. How have you seen audit groups relate to that?
I think maybe what we're starting to discover is, and particularly with the interviews we had this year, is that it's not as simple as do you do audits of strategic business risks, because what we saw is a relatively small number, as you indicate, only about 6% indicate they do audits of strategic business risks. But we see a much broader percentage of internal audit departments that address strategic business risks during the course of normal audit coverage, such as when they're doing operational audits or when they're doing IT audits or perhaps even compliance audits. So it may be that internal audit is actually addressing strategic business risks through the full portfolio of internal audit coverage and not just a simple slice of the pie.
The last thing I wanted to chat about is this career path. Our Pulse of the Profession also stated that 42% of chief audit executives come from outside of the profession. There's a number of risks and benefits involved in that. Do you have any insight or comments regarding that?
Well, this idea that chief audit executives should always come from within the internal audit profession, we've known for some time that that's not necessarily being practiced. That in fact, a substantial percentage, and as the survey this year indicated, over 40%, are coming from outside of internal audit when they assume that CAE role. We think there are probably several factors in that. One is that a lot of companies recognize the importance of internal audit and want to afford the individuals who have executive potential in the company the opportunity to get that exposure. We also believe that a lot of times management and even the board are looking for deeper knowledge of the business. We've seen some advantages. We've seen individuals who've taken over internal audit without an internal audit background who've been tremendous change agents. They've brought very passionate and positive change to the internal audit function. So there are benefits, but we also see some risks, particularly if that individual knows that they're only going to be in that role for a short period of time and then they're going to rotate back into the business. We think there's at least a risk of a perception of a lack of objectivity during that 2 or 3 years when they're in that role. We believe that the way to mitigate some of this risk, if a company does want to use the CAE role as an executive developmental post, is to ensure that the individual comes with the right experience and the right understanding of risk management and controls. But more importantly, we think that the audit committee needs to play a strong and effective role in oversight of internal audit at all times, but particularly when an individual is in there who might be perceived as not objective because perhaps they were put there by management and the expectation is they'll move back into management.
So Richard, one of our CAEs made a comment that it's much better to speak with business leaders as if we are a business leader ourselves. So we're getting to the point about being a business acumen and not coming across like an auditor trying to find something.
Right.
And being able to talk in the same playing field.
Right. It's this whole concept of how do you become a trusted advisor. So much of what we've seen about what makes an internal audit head or chief auditor an effective trusted advisor is not just that we know how to lead internal audits or we know how to audit, but that we can also supplement that and our knowledge of the business with a strong relationship acumen and the ability to effectively communicate. So our advice always is to, and this is true whether we're talking about a seasoned internal audit professional who becomes a CAE or anyone who takes that role on, is to make sure you leverage skills other than just the technical skills to run an internal audit function.
Well, great. I think the Pulse has some great points for chief audit executives to move forward and learn how to add value or continue to add value to their departments with the 3 lines of defense, getting more clarity in that area. Also making sure they are considering strategic risk throughout their audit plan and throughout the year. And then also looking at the competencies they need to enhance so that they can continue to be chief audit executives.
I think it was an insightful study this year. It should be very valuable for our chief audit executives and others in the internal audit community.
All right, great. Thank you.